They laughed at me. Not just the small, polite chuckles that hover around awkward moments, not the accidental, embarrassed giggles people sometimes can't help but let slip. This was laughter. Sharp, cold, intentional. A symphony of sneers, rolled eyes, wine glasses raised mid-mockery. They laughed at me because of my son, because of the way I chose to raise him, because of what he wore, how he spoke, how he sat with a straight spine and a quiet mouth at a table full of barking, bragging adults. They laughed because his curls weren't slicked back like the Harper boys, or styled into some runway clone like Jessica's twins. They laughed because I still packed him lunch in a bento box. Because he still carried around that tattered fox plushie with one button eye, because I still picked him up after school instead of sending a nanny. They laughed because he wasn't on TikTok, because he didn't know the latest dance, because I didn't raise a performance. They laughed because they mistook gentleness for weakness, thought intelligence in silence was emptiness, thought he was a failure because he wasn't a mirror of their noise. And I took it. I took it all. Every dig, every sideways glance, every bless your heart. And he's special, isn't he? They thought I couldn't hear, or maybe they wanted me to. Maybe it gave them pleasure to humiliate me in front of their gold-plated husbands and Botoxed wives. This dinner, this annual toxic chandelier-lit ritual, was supposed to be a celebration, a gathering of old friends from Harvard and Wharton and Stanford, a way to remind each other how far we'd come, how successful we'd all become. Only I'd chosen a different success. I didn't chase CFO titles or yachts. I left the hedge fund in 14, walked out during lunch and never looked back. I started over, alone, with a baby in one arm and a purpose in the other. To raise a man of substance, not of status. They never forgave me for that. They called it a breakdown, called it postpartum psychosis. They told everyone I'd snapped. And now, 10 years later, here I was again. Invited out of politeness, kept around like a cautionary tale. My son, Elijah, sat beside me in a pressed white shirt and a navy blue blazer, fingers folded neatly on his lap, eyes scanning the room with quiet curiosity. He had that stillness about him that made people nervous, the kind of calm that absorbs every word, every breath. But to them he was just a weirdo. And then one of them, Gavin, I remember his voice because it always had that smirk in it, the kind that thinks it's clever, raised his glass and said, "To our children, the future CEOs, surgeons and senators of America." And Elijah too, of course. The laughter started slowly, like a tremor before the quake. I saw Martha try to hide her grin behind her wineglass. I saw Jessica's shoulders shake with silent snickers. I saw how no one stopped him. Not even Claire, who used to call me her sister. And Elijah just sat there, still and small and watching. I felt my heart clench, not with shame but with fury. They didn't know, they had no idea. I reached into my bag, pulled out the envelope I'd brought with me just in case and slid it across the table to my son. He looked at me, eyes calm, waiting. I nodded. And he opened it. Inside was a simple sheet of paper, a letter and a check. The letter was from the Office of Advanced Theoretical Research at Caltech. It read, "Dear Elijah Hawthorne, we are thrilled to inform you that your quantum computation model, submitted to the 2025 symposium, has not only been accepted for presentation but has been selected for full sponsorship and future development funding. At age 10, you are the youngest contributor in the symposium's 94-year history." And the check, it was for $75,000. An advance. For a boy they said was slow and freak. He folded the letter and the check back into the envelope and handed it back to me without a word. The table was silent. Forks paused in midair. Glasses hovered between lip and table. No one spoke. Gavin's mouth hung open like a fish gasping for meaning. I smiled, not out of spite but relief. Relief that the truth was finally visible. Elijah has chosen to remain off social media. I said calmly, because he finds it distracts from his research. He wakes up at 4:30 every morning to write code, not captions. He builds simulations, not personas. And when he's not doing that, he's reading Chekhov, translating ancient Greek texts, or playing piano. He doesn't do this because I force him to. He does it because he loves it. Because his mind is different. Because he's not like your children. And thank God for that. No one clapped. No one had to. Their silence was the applause. And Elijah, my strange, brilliant boy, just smiled at me, his soft, quiet smile, the one he saves for when he knows he's made me proud. And I leaned in close and whispered, "They laughed, baby. But you answered." And that night after dessert they came to me one by one. Asked if I'd mind if their children spent some time with Elijah. If he tutored and if he mentored. If he could help them refocus. I said no. Not out of vengeance. But because the mind of a child like Elijah is a garden, and not everyone deserves to walk in it. Especially not those who laughed at the seed and only came when the fruit began to grow. They didn't see the years that came before the envelope. They didn't see the winter I couldn't afford heat and bundled Elijah in 3 sweaters and 2 pairs of socks. How we read by the flicker of tea lights because I didn't want to rack up the electric bill. They didn't see how I took freelance transcription jobs at night, typing court depositions and corporate board meetings until my fingers cramped and my eyes burned, while Elijah slept on a mattress with springs poking through the fabric. They didn't see the casseroles we made out of lentils and canned corn, the games we invented using cardboard and broken clock parts, the lullabies I whispered in the dark, promising him he was more than the world would ever admit. They didn't see the way he lined up blocks not by color or shape but by mass, or how he wept truly, when he learned about the heat death of the universe. They called it strange. I called it divine. And still they laughed. They said I was wasting my potential. That I could have been something. That I was born to be more than a mother. As if that role was a tragedy. As if birthing genius, holding it close in the night, protecting it from a world that only worships what it understands, was somehow failure. They called me crazy and I let them. Because some journeys don't need applause. Some roads are meant to be walked alone, hand in hand with the only person who matters. The first time Elijah showed me the code he wrote, he was 7. I didn't understand it, not really. It was a sequence of logic loops and fractal patterns, designed to simulate choice under pressure. I asked him where he learned it and he simply said, I saw it. As if the universe had whispered it to him while he slept. I posted it in a quiet programming forum under an anonymous handle. The replies poured in. Who made this? Is this a troll? This isn't possible. I didn't reply. I just saved the comments in a folder called Echoes. I kept everything in that folder. Every time someone doubted him or laughed at him or questioned my sanity. Every time someone said he was too quiet, too slow, too soft. Proof of how the world sounded before it changed. There was a teacher once, Mrs. Carmichael. She taught science and wore perfume that smelled like peaches gone bad. She gave Elijah a D on a project because she said, it wasn't what I asked for. Never mind that he had built a fully functional weather simulation in Python, connected it to a real-time API, and cross-referenced it with satellite data to forecast cloud formation. She'd asked for a poster board with cotton balls. And when I came in for a conference, she smiled that condescending smile that women save for other women they've already decided to despise. She told me with grave concern that Elijah may be on the spectrum, and that maybe I should consider special education resources. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply withdrew him that afternoon and homeschooled him from our kitchen table with a whiteboard I bought off Craigslist and books I ordered one at a time from secondhand stores. I made my own curriculum. I let him lead. If he wanted to spend 4 weeks studying electricity, we did it. If he wanted to build a camera obscura out of cereal boxes, we did it. If he wanted to learn Russian just to read a cosmonaut's memoir in the original text, I downloaded Duolingo and learned it with him. He thrived not in the way that gets you trophies or varsity letters, but in the quiet ways, the ones that don't get yearbook pages or PDA attention. He began to hum when he worked, low and slow like an old engine. He began to draw diagrams in his notebooks with arrows that spiraled like galaxies. He began to write down dreams and decode them not as symbols but as math. And every day I made him tea at 3 p.m. and we would sit and talk about anything he wanted. Sometimes physics, sometimes foxes, sometimes time travel and what it would mean for love. That hour, always sacred, was where I learned the rhythm of his mind, how it flowed not like a train on tracks, but like a river refusing banks. By the time he turned 9, I started getting emails. Professors. Researchers. Coders. One from a man in Zurich who had found Elijah's anonymized model on GitHub and wanted to know who he really was. Another from a retired engineer who said the logic in Elijah's simulation reminded him of a military algorithm he once worked on at DARPA. I ignored most of them. I didn't want Elijah to become a commodity. Not yet. Not before he knew who he was. And not before the world stopped laughing. As I knew they would. I knew this day would come. The dinner, the mockery, the silence. The envelope wasn't revenge. It was a door. A moment he would remember for the rest of his life. Because genius doesn't need permission. It only needs patience. And still that night after the dinner, after the stunned apologies and half-hearted, we didn't mean it glances as I drove us home in our quiet little hybrid, Elijah sat in the back seat, Fox plushie in one hand, and he asked, "Do you think they'll like me now?" And my throat clenched because I had forgotten he was still just a boy. A child who still wanted to be liked. And I said, "Elijah, liking you has nothing to do with understanding you. And that's their problem, not yours." He looked out the window, nodded once and whispered, "Okay." And I knew that word was heavier than it sounded. Because he carried too much for someone so small. Because the world demanded explanations from him it never demanded from the loud boys, the cruel boys, the ones who mocked instead of listened. I pulled over. Parked the car. Turned around and looked him in the eyes. "You're not here to make them comfortable," I said. "You're here to make them think." He nodded again. And for the first time that day he smiled wide, teeth and all, and said, "Then I think I'm doing it right." It started as a game, or at least that's what Elijah told me when I found the sketches scattered across the kitchen table one night at 2:11 a.m., when the house was asleep and the moonlight poured in like cold milk across the floor. He'd fallen asleep there, head resting on his notebook, pencil still in hand, murmuring soft fragments in his sleep. Recursive, symmetry, 11, always 11. And I remember staring at the pages, flipping through them, each one filled with spirals of numbers flowing like music, like rivers folding in on themselves, never repeating yet somehow always familiar. I didn't understand what I was looking at. But I felt it a pattern too perfect to be random. An architecture beneath chaos. He called it the veil. Not a name I gave it, not some label from a textbook, but his own invention, spoken with a kind of reverence like it wasn't math but a message. I waited until morning, made us pancakes, and asked him what it was. He shrugged, buttered his third one, and said, "It's not for anything. It's just what I see when I close my eyes." I told him to keep going. That I trusted him. That I believed in his vision even if I couldn't see it yet. Because faith is seeing the light before the switch is ever flipped. And Elijah's mind was a lighthouse. But built to cut through fog that others drowned in. Within a month, the veil had become more than sketches. He built a model on an old laptop. My battered MacBook with missing keys and a screen held together with tape. He coded it in silence, wearing his Fox hoodie, legs curled under him, eyes flicking across the screen with the trance-like focus of someone listening to a language that only he could hear. I asked if he needed help. He shook his head. "I'll know when it's done." And I believed him. Days passed. I kept the lights low. I answered every knock at the door like a guard dog. Because something sacred was happening. He finished it one night just before his 10th birthday. He didn't say a word, just handed me the flash drive and said, "It's ready." I asked what it did. He said, "It sees." That was all. We plugged it into my work computer just to test it. No interface. Just a command line with a blinking cursor. I asked, "What's the command?" He typed 5 characters, veil, R. The screen flickered. Then lines of output began to pour down. Numbers, letters, coordinates, temperatures, camera feeds, weather reports, live trading data, satellite images. "It's pulling real-time data?" I asked. "From where?" He shrugged. "Everywhere." The model didn't just simulate choice like his earlier project. It predicted it. After watching enough live inputs, it began to anticipate what would happen next. I saw it flag a traffic accident 10 minutes before it occurred, on a street 2 states away. I saw it reroute electricity in a mock simulation to prevent a grid failure no one even knew was coming. I saw it model viral growth patterns of digital content and tell me which meme would explode by morning. And then it said something I'll never forget. In plain text it printed, "Hello, Elijah." I remember staring at it, breath caught as if a ghost had just whispered in the room. I turned to him and he just nodded. "It's not alive," he said, "but it knows how to act alive. It wants to learn faster." I closed the laptop. Gently. Like closing a casket. "We're not ready," I whispered. "Not yet." And he didn't argue. He just nodded. "Okay, Mom." But word got out anyway. I don't know how. Maybe it was the test upload to a private server. Maybe someone at the ISP was watching. Maybe it was just inevitable. Some things glow too bright to stay hidden. The first email came from a hedge fund in New York. The next from a defense contractor. Then a tech CEO. All offering to collaborate. All offering access. I declined them all. I didn't respond. But one name caught my breath. A name I hadn't heard since that dinner. Ethan Shaw, my cousin. The one who laughed the loudest. The one who called Elijah quietly broken. The one who worked at that AI think tank in Palo Alto and once bragged about predicting stock crashes with bots that barely understood human speech. He sent a message that felt different, less corporate. I know it's him. And I know it works. Let's talk. I stared at the message for 10 minutes before I told Elijah. He didn't flinch. Just said, let's meet him. We'll wear our armor. So we flew to California. I used miles I'd saved for emergencies. Rented a room in a motel with walls so thin we could hear the neighbors breathing. And we walked into that glass tower like knights into a cathedral, heads high, hands empty. Ethan greeted us with smiles, hugs, apologies. He wore a Patagonia vest and billion-dollar shoes and smelled like vintage arrogance. You've done something historic, he said to Elijah. I just want to help the world see it. Elijah looked at him and asked, would the world still see it if my name wasn't on it? And Ethan blinked and smiled. Well, of course. We'd credit you, but anonymity might be safer. For now. I watched Elijah tuck his hands into his hoodie. A silent no. I said nothing. Because I wanted to see how far Ethan would go. He led us through labs. Showed us machines worth more than our house. Your model could enhance every sector, he whispered. Finance, medicine, climate, and war. At that last word, Elijah flinched. And I knew the answer. We left without shaking hands. On the way to the airport, Elijah was quiet. Then he said, they'll try to take it. And I said, let them try. That night back home he encrypted the code. Split it into 7 fragments. Buried them across the internet like seeds. Left clues only he would know how to find. And then he wiped the original. No one gets to own the veil, he said. Not even me. I nodded. And I felt something shift in the air around us. Like the storm had passed but the wind still whispered.